Okay, so this is the Daf for April 25th, 2025. I guess that's Erev Shabbat. So we're in Makkot, Daf 17. So here we go. He designates a portion of the produce by means of calling the name upon poor man's tithe, but he is not required to physically separate that portion and give it to the poor. So Rav Yosef suggests, what is it not that they disagree with regard to this? That one sage, the rabbis, holds that produce from which poor man's tithe was certainly not separated is rendered untithed produce, and therefore, in a case where there is uncertainty whether poor man's tithe was separated, one is required to separate it. And one sage, Rabbi Eliezer, holds that produce from which man's poor tithe was certainly not separated is not rendered untithed produce, and therefore one need not even designate poor man's tithe by calling its name upon a portion of that produce. Abaye said to Rav Yosef, if it is so that this is the point in dispute, rather than disagreeing with regard to a case of uncertainty, whether a poor man's tithe was separated, let them disagree with regard to a case of certainty that poor man's tithe was not separated. Okay, rather, contrary to the previous suggestion, say that everyone agrees that produce from which poor man's tithe was certainly not separated is rendered untithed produce. And here it is with regard to this that they disagree. One sage, Rabbi Eliezer, holds Amei Haaretz, or the people of the land, are not suspected of refraining from separating poor man's tithe of demeh. Since it is merely a matter of money, and no sanctity is involved, he separates poor man's tithe, although he does not actually give it to the poor. And the rabbis hold, meaning the majority, since the matter involves exertion for him, he does not even separate poor man's tithe. The Mishnah teaches, how much does one need to eat from untithed produce and be liable to receive lashes? Rabbi Shimon says, even if one ate any amount of untithed produce, he is liable to receive lashes. And the rabbis say he is liable only if he eats an olive bulk. Rav Bavli says that Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says their dispute is with regard to one who eats one kernel of wheat of untithed produce. But with regard to flour, everyone agrees that one is liable only if he eats an olive bulk. And Rabbi Yermiah says that Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says, just as there is a dispute with regard to this case of a kernel of wheat, so too there is a dispute with regard to that case of flour. The Gemara cites proof from that which we learned in the Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon said to them, do you not concede to me with regard to one who eats an ant of any size that he is liable to receive lashes? The rabbi said to Rabbi Shimon, he is flogged for eating an ant of any size due to the fact that it is an intact entity in the form of its creation. So Rabbi Shimon said to them, one kernel of wheat is also in the form of its creation. The Gemara infers from Rabbi Shimon's response for a kernel of wheat, yes, one is liable. For any amount of flour, no, one is not liable. Apparently, even Rabbi Shimon concedes that one is liable for eating only an olive bulk of wheat flour, in accordance with the statement that Rav Bavli says that Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says. The Gemara answers, it is in accordance with the statement of the rabbis that Rabbi Shimon spoke to them, and he meant as follows, according to my opinion, even if one ate any amount of flour, he is also liable, but according to your opinion, concede to me at least that one is liable if he eats one kernel of wheat, as it is in the form of its creation. And the rabbis say in response, there's a difference. An entity with a soul, so a living creature, is significant, and one is liable for eating any entity of any volume. A kernel of wheat is not significant. The Gemara notes, it is taught in Braita in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yermiah that Rabbi Shimon says one who eats any amount of food that is forbidden is liable to receive lashes. The sages said the measure of an olive bulk only with regard to liability to bring a sin offering for one who unwittingly ate forbidden food. Back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, in the case of a priest who eats first fruits before the one who brought the fruits to the temple recited over those fruits the Torah verses that he is obligated to recite, Deuteronomy 26, 3-10. And one who ate offerings in the most sacred order outside the curtains, surrounding the tabernacle courtyard or outside the temple courtyard, and one who ate offerings of lesser sanctity or second tithe produce outside the wall of Jerusalem. And also one who breaks the bone of a ritually pure paschal offering. In all these cases he is flogged with 40 lashes. But one who leaves the flesh of the ritually pure paschal offering until the morning of the 15th of Nisan, and one who breaks a bone of a ritually impure paschal offering is not flogged with 40 lashes. With regard to one who takes the mother bird with her fledglings, thereby violating the Torah prohibition, you shall not take the mother with her fledglings. You shall send the mother and the fledglings you may take for yourself. Deuteronomy 22, 6-7. Rabbi Yehuda says he is flogged for taking the mother bird and does not send the mother. And the rabbis say, meaning the majority, he sends the mother and is not flogged, as this is the principle. With regard to any prohibition that entails a command to arise and perform a mitzvah, he is not liable to receive lashes for its violation. The Mishnah teaches that a priest who eats first fruits before the one who brought the fruits to the temple recited the accompanying Torah verses is liable to receive lashes. With regard to this statement, Rabbi Bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says this is the statement of Rabbi Akiva, whose statements are often cited in the Mishnah, unattributed. But the rabbis say, with regard to first fruits, the lack of placement alongside the altar invalidates them. And they may not be eaten. But the lack of recitation of the accompanying Torah verses does not invalidate them. And if one placed them and did not recite the accompanying Torah verses, the priest who eats them is not flogged. The Gemara suggests and let Rabbi Yochanan say this statement in the Mishnah is the unattributed statement of Rabbi Shimon, who stated this halacha explicitly, rather than attributing the statement to Rabbi Akiva, whose statement was not explicit. The Gemara answers, this teaches us that, although he did not say so explicitly, Rabbi Akiva holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. What is the statement of Rabbi Shimon? It is as it is taught in a Braita with regard to food items that may not be eaten outside the walls of Jerusalem. It is written, quote, you may not eat within your gates the tithe of your grain, or of your wine, or of your oil, or the firstborn of your herd, or of your flock, nor of any of your vows that you vow, nor your gift offerings, nor the donation of your hand. Deuteronomy 12:17. The sages explain that with regard to the phrase, nor the donation of terumat, your hand, these are first fruits. Rabbi Shimon said, what does this phrase come to teach us? If it is to teach a prohibition to eat the first fruits outside the wall of Jerusalem, there is no need for a verse, as it may be derived by means of an a fortiori inference from the lenient case of second tithe produce. If, with regard to the lenient case of second tithe produce, one who eats them outside the wall is flogged, then with regard to first fruits, all the more so is it not clear that he is flogged. Rather, the verse comes to teach only with regard to a priest who partakes of first fruits before the person who brought the fruits to the temple recited the accompanying Torah verses over them, teaching that he is flogged. The Braita continues, nor your gift offerings. This is a thanks offering and a peace offering that one donates voluntarily. Rabbi Shimon says, what does this phrase to come to teach us? If it is to teach that it is prohibited to eat a thanks offering and a peace offering outside the wall of Jerusalem, there is no need for a verse, as it may be derived by means of an a fortiori inference from the case of the second tithe produce, from whose consumption outside the wall one is flogged, despite the fact that it is not an offering. Rather, the verse comes to teach only with regard to one who partakes of thanks offering or of a peace offering before the sprinkling of its blood on the altar, before the consumption of its flesh is permitted, but he is flogged. The Braita continues, or the firstborn. This is the firstborn. Rabbi Shimon says, what does this verse come to teach us? If it is to teach that it is prohibited to eat a firstborn animal outside the wall of Jerusalem, there is no need for a verse, as it may be derived by means of an a fortiori inference from the case of the second tithe produce. If it is to teach that it is prohibited to eat a firstborn animal before the sprinkling of the blood, it may be derived by means of an a fortiori inference from the case of a thanks offering and a peace offering, which are offerings of lesser sanctity, as even non-priests may partake of their flesh. Rather, the verse comes to teach with regard to a non-priest who partakes of the flesh of a firstborn, even after the sprinkling of its blood, he is flogged. The Braita continues, on your herd or of your flock. This is a sin offering and a guilt offering, which are offerings of the most sacred order, which may be eaten only within the temple courtyard. Rabbi Shimon says, what does this verse come to teach us? If it is to teach that it is prohibited to eat a sin offering and a guilt offering outside of the wall, there is no need for a verse, as it may be derived by means of an a fortiori inference from the case of second tithe produce. If it is to teach that it is prohibited to eat a sin offering and a guilt offering before the sprinkling of the blood, it may be derived by means of an a fortiori inference from the case of a thanks offering and a peace offering, which are offerings of lesser sanctity. If it is to teach that it is prohibited for a non-priest to eat a sin offering and a guilt offering after the sprinkling of its blood, it may be derived by means of an a fortiori inference from the case of a firstborn animal. Rather, the verse comes to teach only with regard to one who partakes of the flesh of a sin offering or a guilt offering, even after the sprinkling of its blood, which is the correct time to partake of it, but he partakes of it outside of the curtains surrounding the tabernacle courtyard or outside of the temple courtyard, that he is flogged. Okay, the Braita continues, your vows. This is the burnt offering, which is an offering to the most sacred order and is entirely consumed upon the altar, and is brought as a gift offering, not as an obligation. Rabbi Shimon says, what does this verse come to teach us? If it is to teach that it is prohibited to eat a burnt offering outside of the wall of Jerusalem, there is no need for a verse, as it may be derived by means of an a fortiori inference from the case of a second tithe produce. If it is to teach that it is prohibited to eat a burnt offering before the sprinkling of the blood, it may be derived by means of an a fortiori inference from the case of thanks offering and peace offering, which are offerings of lesser sanctity. If it is to teach that it is prohibited for a non-priest to eat a sin offering and guilt offering after the sprinkling of its blood, it may be derived by means of an a fortiori inference from the case of a firstborn animal. If it is to teach that it is prohibited to eat a burnt offering outside of the curtains surrounding the tabernacle courtyard or outside the temple courtyard, there is an a fortiori inference from a sin offering and a guilt offering. Rather, the verse comes to teach only with regard to one who partakes of the flesh of a burnt offering after the sprinkling, even inside the courtyard, that he is flogged. Rava says, with regard to Rabbi Shimon's statement in the Braita, with regard to anyone whose mother is bearing a child who is like Rabbi Shimon, she should bear that child, and if not, it is preferable that she does not bear him at all. Rava was so impressed by Rabbi Shimon's statement that he praised him and characterized him as the model of a wise man. Rava added, and I say this even though there is a refutation for each of his conclusions. What are the refutations? What is the stringency of the first fruits vis-a-vis second tithe produce? It is that first fruits are forbidden to non-priests who are permitted to eat second tithe produce. That can be refuted. On the contrary, second tithe produce is more stringent than first tithes, that it is forbidden to an acute mourner. That is one whose close relative died that day, which is not the case with regard to first fruits, according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. What is the stringency of a thanks offering and a peace offering vis-a-vis a second tithe produce? It is that the thanks offering and the peace offering require the placement of blood and sacrificial portions on the altar. That can be refuted. On the contrary, second tithe produce is more stringent than the thanks offering and the peace offering, in that the redemption of the second tithe produce requires money minted into a coin. A disqualified thanks offering and peace offering, like other disqualified offerings, may be redeemed with any subject of equal value. And what is the stringency of a firstborn offering vis-a-vis a thanks offering and a peace offering? It is that the sanctity of the firstborn takes effect from the womb, while the other offerings are consecrated by their owners. That can be refuted. On the contrary, a thanks offering and a peace offering are more stringent in that they require placing hands on the head of the offering before it is sacrificed. And libations, the waving of the breast and the thigh, which is not the case with regard to a firstborn offering. And what is the stringency of a sin offering and a guilt offering vis-a-vis a firstborn offering. It is that a sin offering and a guilt offering are offerings of the most sacred order that can be refuted. On the contrary, a firstborn offering is more stringent in that its sanctity takes effect from the womb, not from consecration by its owner. And what is the stringency of the burnt offering vis-a-vis a sin offering and a guilt offering? It is that it is burnt in its entirety upon the altar, and no part of it is given to the priest. That can be refuted. On the contrary, the sin offering and the guilt offering are more stringent in that they atone for one's sins, and a burnt offering is brought as a gift offering. And let's see, all of those matters listed in the Braita are more stringent than the burnt offering because there are two consumptions with regard to each of these matters as they consumed upon the altar and consumed by their owner in the priests, plural, whereas the burnt offering is commanded in its entirety upon the altar. The Gemara asks, rather, what is the meaning of the statement of praise with regard to anyone whose mother is bearing a child who is like Rabbi Shimon? She should bear that child, and if not, it is preferable if she does not bear him at all. Ultimately, all of his derivations can be refuted. The Gemara answers, the praise is based on the fact that in order to arrive at what he himself holds, he transposes the verse and interprets it. So Rabbi Shimon does not interpret the verse from beginning to end. Rather, he begins with the final case of first fruits in order to arrive at the desired conclusion. So Rava was impressed with Rabbi Shimon's interpretation. The Gemara asks with regard to Rabbi Shimon, who derived prohibitions not written in the Torah by means of an a fortiori inference, and does one derive a prohibition from an a fortiori inference? But even according to one who says that if there is a prohibition written explicitly in the Torah, one administers punishment based on an a fortiori inference, one does not derive a prohibition from an a fortiori inference. The Gemara answers, Rabbi Shimon does not derive prohibitions for which one is flogged from the inferences. Rather, he derives a mere prohibition. The Gemara asks, what does Rava say with regard to a non-priest who ate the flesh of a burnt offering before sprinkling its blood? Outside the walls, according to Rabbi Shimon, he is flogged with 5 sets of lashes. One because he is a non-priest, one for eating a burnt offering, one for eating the flesh of an offering before its blood was sprinkled, one for eating the flesh of an offering, one for eating offerings in the most sacred order outside of the temple courtyard, and one for eating sacrificial food outside of Jerusalem. Apparently, Rabbi Shimon holds that all of these are actual prohibitions for which one is flogged. The Gemara answers, it does not mean that one is actually flogged, rather it means that they are 5 prohibitions. The Gemara asks, but didn't we learn in the Mishnah, and these are the people who are flogged by Torah law? Among them is a priest who eats first fruits before the recitation of the accompanying Torah verses, and the Gemara established that the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon.